We spent a good portion of last night's show covering what it is that Israel did in Lebanon, this really unprecedented attack where the Israelis had intercepted, very obviously, a significant part of the supply chain that feeds Lebanon with all sorts of mobile devices, in particular after October 7th. Hezbollah decided that they no longer wanted to use cell phones because of the Israeli ease of spying on them, and so they resorted instead to wireless pagers, and the Israelis somehow were able to get their hands on those pagers, headed to Lebanon and to Hezbollah in particular, intercept them in mid-route or collaborating with the manufacturer before they left the factory, and implanted bombs, remote-controlled bombs, in thousands of those devices. Really not entirely sure where they were headed. They ended up in a lot of cases in Hezbollah's hands, but even when they ended up in Hezbollah's hands as opposed to people in the proximity of Hezbollah, when the Israelis decided to blow up instantaneously thousands of devices, they had no idea where those devices were. And many of them were in classic civilian locations, in shopping malls, in restaurants, in street fairs for produce, in stores, in playgrounds, and all over the place, wherever someone might be who had one of those devices, and yet the Israelis just blew them up instantaneously, having no idea who they were about to kill. And the casualties were at least 3,000. At least 10 people died yesterday, including 2 children. And then today again, Israel returned and launched another similar attack, although this time on walkie-talkies and other electronic devices that also made its way to Lebanon that obviously the Israelis had intercepted. In this case, there's not even an argument that those were specifically designed for or used exclusively by Hezbollah fighters. And as a result, there were massive explosions all over the city. There were apartment buildings on fire in entirely civilian areas. At least another dozen people in Lebanon were killed, and at least 400 people suffered serious casualties. Here is from AP News, Associated Press today. The headline is, Lebanon is rocked again by exploding devices of Israel as Israel declares a, quote, new phase of their war. Quote, walkie-talkies and solar equipment exploded in Beirut and other parts of Lebanon on Wednesday in an apparent second wave of attacks targeting devices a day after pagers used by Hezbollah blew up, state media and officials from the militant group said. At least 14 people were killed and more than 450 wounded in the second wave, the health ministry said. The attacks, which were widely believed to be carried out by Israel targeting Hezbollah, but have also killed civilians, of course, have heightened fears that the two sides' simmering conflict could escalate into all-out war. Speaking to Israeli troops on Wednesday, Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, you may remember him because he was the one right at the start of the Israeli attack on Gaza, who said we're going to starve them of all food, of water, of fuel, electricity. It's a total blockade, which was then, of course, used by countries like South Africa and Nicaragua, who wanted to bring war crimes cases against the Israelis, and countries like Germany that were funding and arming them. He said, quote, we are at the start of a new phase in the war. It requires courage, determination, and perseverance. He made no mention of the exploding devices, but praised the work of Israel's army and national security agencies, saying, quote, the results are very impressive. We have had countless experts on our show since October 7th to analyze the Israeli conflict. And whenever I asked about the risk of escalation, namely a new front opening in Lebanon or potentially even regionally in Iran with the Houthis, many of them said, including the most informed ones, that they think Netanyahu's goal is to prolong the war in Gaza as long as possible and then expand that war to all of Israel's enemies, drawing the United States in. For decades, it has been the dream of Netanyahu to lure the United States in to fight a war against Iran and take out Israel's greatest enemy, as we were convinced to do in 2003, when the United States, for whatever reason, invaded Iraq, a country that had nothing to do with 9/11, and took out Saddam Hussein after an avalanche of constant false propaganda, as we're about to show you. And it seems like Netanyahu certainly has a lot of personal motives to stay in power as long as there's wars, namely that he faces the prospect of jail and a corruption trial that's very serious if he's removed. But he also clearly is thinking about his legacy. He's at the end of his life. He's quite old now, and he obviously is envisioning himself as some historic great Israeli leader who's going to dispatch and vanquish all of Israel's enemies in the region, no matter how many wars it takes, no matter how many civilians are killed, no matter how much it draws the United States into that conflict. Here, just to give you a sense for what I think is the key point, and this is why I want to link it so much to 9/11. After 9/11, the United States had all sorts of, quote, successes. We started bombing countless Muslim countries. We would constantly hear, oh, today we killed the number 3 in command in Al-Qaeda, the number 3 person, not Osama bin Laden, or not the number 2, but the number 3. And I can literally show you, I've done this before, 8, 9, 10 different press accounts celebrating on different dates that we've taken out the number 3. And obviously, it didn't have any effect because there was no strategic value to these bombings. It was just a kind of way to keep the war going, to feed the war machine, to make Americans feed on this kind of anti-Muslim, anti-Arab hatred that they wanted to build and successfully did build in the wake of 9/11, and then even the anthrax attacks that they blamed on Iraq. And from the very beginning, after October 7th, when we went on the air, we talked a lot about the dangers that Israel was about to embark on the same sort of thing, using exactly the same mentality. Namely, just a kind of avalanche of violence, indiscriminate violence that had no strategic aim. Just kind of giving this cathartic satisfaction that people were just being killed. Not even people having anything to do with October 7th or any terrorist group, just people in the region, Arabs, Muslims, who a lot of people blame just for being Arab and Muslim and therefore are happy to see killed. And that's the reality. Just like that sentiment prevailed after 9/11 and led to so many of the abuses that so many people now say they have come to regret. Exemplifying that problem is the New York Times headline today about this new attack. Quote, it was about yesterday's attack, actually. Quote, Israel's pager attack was a tactical success without a strategic goal, analysts say. It was a tactical success with no strategic goal. Quote, by targeting so many pagers at the same time, Israel demonstrated technological prowess and partly restored the aura of its intelligence agencies, but its long-term intent is unclear. Quote, Israel's attack on pagers and other wireless devices belonging to Hezbollah was a tactical success that had no clear strategic effect, analysts say, while it embarrassed Hezbollah and appeared to incapacitate many of its members. The attack has not so far altered the military balance along the Israeli-Lebanon border, where more than 100,000 civilians on either side have been displaced by a low-intensity battle. Hezbollah and the Israeli military remain locked in the same position, exchanging missiles and artillery fire on Wednesday at a tempo in keeping with the daily skirmishes fought between the sides since October. Although the attack on Tuesday was an eye-catching demonstration of Israel's technological prowess, Israel has not so far sought to capitalize on the confusion it sowed by initiating a decisive blow against Hezbollah and invading Lebanon. A second wave of blasts was heard across Lebanon on Wednesday, reportedly caused by exploding walkie-talkies and other devices, but the Israeli military did not appear to be preparing for an imminent ground invasion. Now, for years we have heard that Iran is this apocalyptic cult of religious fanaticism that has no interest and value of life on Earth because they only think about the afterlife. They don't value life at all. They value death. And that for that reason, if they got a nuclear weapon, they would just use it instantaneously because they don't care about the consequences. That's what we're always being told. They have no rational leaders. Same thing with Putin. For 20 years, we heard he was a shrewd, reliable, rational, self-interested, motivated, calculating leader, and then suddenly we wanted to demonize him. He became a Hitler-like figure who just couldn't be trusted to even act within the bounds of rationality. That's always what we're told about whoever we need to demonize. Same thing about Saddam Hussein. If he got weapons of mass destruction, he would just use them because he doesn't care about life or anything else. And meanwhile, if you look at the Middle East over the past 6 months, the Israelis have done so many extreme things to try and provoke the Iranians into a war that most sovereign countries would have reacted to ways far stronger than Iran has done, including Israel's decision to blow up the Iranian embassy, Iranian consulate in Damascus. And Iran had to respond. No country could refrain from responding when another country just air bombs its embassy. And yet Iran launched some of its most primitive, some of its slowest weapons that it knew likely would be intercepted and were all intercepted, and saved its far more sophisticated and deadly missiles for another day. And then when the Israelis engineered the murder of a Hamas official who had been invited onto Iranian soil to participate in the inauguration of the Iranian president, the Iranians announced and continuously insisted that they could not be talked out of major escalation, major retaliation against Israel, and so far they've done nothing of the kind. They haven't retaliated in any way for that much more egregious violation of their sovereignty. And now you have Israel attacking Hezbollah in these new ways, killing a lot of Lebanese civilians, which obviously is going to unite civilians in Lebanon with Hezbollah and hatred of Israel and in the perception that Israel is a threat to their country. And there seems to be almost an incentive or an attempt to provoke Hezbollah into a war. And Israeli leaders and officials and the government are already talking about how this war is now underway. It's a new phase of the war, and the United States has deployed many military assets in the region, saying it will defend Israel in the event of escalation. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.